It's official. Miss Johnson's lost it. I had a horrible morning. I'm gonna be real with you right now. All the tech problems happened at once. It was so bad. And it's not working. It's not. And so I took a break because you know what? Sometimes you get really overwhelmed. And so I took a break and I'm like, what's gonna make me happy right now or what's gonna make me smile? And I love laughing at myself. So this is what we're working with, okay? I got my Christmas onesie on. And I'm gonna read to you my Christmas onesie because I'm sure you need a little bit of a break and a laugh. Also, I look like an Eskimo or something. Look at this hood, it's amazing. It's so soft. But if you're struggling with tech, if you're struggling with e-learning, I feel you. It is rough sometimes. But you know what? It's important that if things are getting too overwhelming, just follow Miss Johnson, pause what you're doing, put it away. It can wait for a minute. And you gotta take a break. You gotta do something. And that's what I'm doing now because it sounds silly, but making these videos and reaching out to you and connecting with you really makes me happy. And so I was like, I'm done. I'm gonna do what I know I can do and have fun with it. But yeah, I will be rocking this the whole video. Okay, and I probably should get off the ground. Just give me. Yeah, I am rocking this. You can't. I'm like, Minnie, look at this. And I even have pom-poms. Look at that. But yes, I am wearing this the whole time. Can you see my face? I'll do this. I'm wearing this the whole time because I can, and because you know what? It's gonna make me happy, and that's what we're gonna do. Addition to the wall, I made a quote for all my teachers out there because you know what? It is hard sometimes. And today's one of those mornings for me. It's not even 9 o'clock, and I'm just like, I need a break already. I know, but I do. May your coffee be strong and your students be calm. That's my wish for you teachers. It's been a day, man. It hasn't even been 9 yet. But you know what? I'm going to turn this day around after I read this. I will try to get back at that tech problem. And you know what? If not, I'm going to say a prayer. I'm going to take another break. And I'm going to keep trying. I'm not going to give up. But if you are struggling with e-learning, I feel you, and it's okay, and we will power through this because it is rough out there, and I feel you, and hence why I am this, because sometimes you gotta pause. And so today is a perfect day because it's a Wayside story day, and I love these stories. And you know what? Usually I read 2. I'm gonna read 3 chapters. One first for us strugglers out there, okay? Let's do this. I'm sorry. I'm like so intense right now. It's been a morning. Okay, where were we? Oh, yes. Joe couldn't count, remember? And then he like all of a sudden woke up and he knew how. And then Sherry's a sleeper and she fell out of the window. Okay, chapter 5, Todd. All the children in Mrs. Jewell's class, except Todd, were talking and carrying on. Todd was thinking. Todd always thought before he spoke. When he got an idea, his eyes lit up. Todd finished thinking and began to speak, but before he said 2 words, Mrs. Jewell called him. Todd, she said, you know better than to talk in class. You must learn to work quietly like the other children. She wrote his name on the blackboard under the word discipline. Todd looked around in amazement. All the other children, who had been talking and screaming and fighting only seconds earlier, were quietly working in their workbooks. Todd scratched his head. A child was given 3 chances in Mrs. Jewell's class. The first time he did something wrong, Mrs. Jewell wrote his name on the blackboard under the word discipline. The second time he did something wrong, she put a check next to his name, and the third time he did something wrong, she circled his name. Todd reached into his desk and pulled out his workbook. He had only just started on it when he felt someone tap on his shoulder. It was Joy. What page are you on? Asked Joy. Page 4, whispered Todd. I'm on page 11, said Joy. Todd didn't say anything. He didn't want to get into trouble. He just went back to work. 5 minutes later, Joy tapped him again. Todd ignored her, so Joy poked him in the back with her pencil. Joe pretended he didn't notice. Joy got up from her seat, sharpened her pencil, came back, and poked him in the back. "What page are you on?" she asked. "Page 5, Todd answered. "Boy, are you dumb," said Joy. "I'm on page 29. "It isn't a race," said Todd. 5 minutes later, Joy pulled Todd's hair and didn't let go until he turned around. "You need to keep your hands to yourself, Joy. I'm watching you." "What page are you on?" she demanded. "Page 6, Todd answered as quietly as he could. "I'm on page 200, shouted Joy. Todd was very angry. "Will you please let me do my work and stop bothering me?" Mrs. Jules heard him. "Todd, what did I say about talking in class?" Todd scratched his head. Mrs. Jules put a check next to Todd's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. Todd really tried to be good. He knew that if he talked one more time, Mrs. Jules would circle his name, and then he'd have to go home early at 12 o'clock on the kindergarten bus, just as he had the day before and the day before that. In fact, there hadn't been a day since Mrs. Jules joined the class that she didn't send Todd home early. She said it was for his own good. The other children always went home at 2 o'clock. Todd wasn't really bad. He just always got caught. He really wanted to stay past 12 o'clock. He wanted to find out what the class did between 12 and 2. But it didn't look as though it was going to be his day. It was only 10:30, and he already had 2 strikes against him. He sealed his lips and went back to work. There was a knock on the door. Mrs. Jules opened it. 2 men stepped in wearing masks and holding guns. "Give us your money," they demanded. "All I have is a nickel," said Mrs. Jules. "I have a dime," said Maricela. "I have 4 cents, said Damien. "What kind of bank is this?" said one of the robbers. "It's not a bank, it's a school," said Todd. "Can't you read?" "No," said the robbers. "Neither can I," said Todd. "Do you mean we walked all the way up 30 flights of stairs for nothing?" asked the robber. "Don't you have anything valuable?" Todd's eyes lit up. "We sure do," he said. "We have knowledge." He grabbed Joy's workbook and gave it to the robbers. "Knowledge is much more valuable than money." "Thanks, kid," said one of the robbers. "Maybe I'll give up being a criminal and become a scientist," said the other. They left the room without hurting anyone. "Now I don't have a workbook," complained Joy. Mrs. Jules gave her a new one. Joy had to start all the way back at the beginning. "Hey, Joy, what page are you on?" asked Todd with a smile. "Page 1, said Joy. "I'm on page 8, laughed Todd triumphantly. Mrs. Jules heard him. She circled his name, and Todd had 3 strikes against him. At 12 o'clock, he left the room to go home early to the kindergarten bus. But this time when he left, he was like a star baseball player leaving the field. All the children stood up and clapped their hands and whistled and cheered for him. Todd just scratched his head. Chapter 6, BB. BB was a girl with short brown hair and little BB nose, totally tiny toes, and big brown eyes. Her full name was BB Gunn. She was the fastest draw in Mrs. Jules' class. She could draw a cat in less than 45 seconds, a dog in less than 30, and a flower in less than 8 seconds. But of course, BB never drew just one dog or one cat or one flower. Art was from 12:30 to 1:30. Why, in that time, she could draw 50 cats, 100 flowers, 20 dogs, and several eggs or watermelons. It took her about the same time to draw a watermelon or an egg. Calvin sat next to BB. He didn't think he was very good at art. Why, it took him the whole period just to draw one airplane. So instead, he just helped BB. He was BB's assistant. As soon as BB would finish one masterpiece, Calvin would take it from her and set down a clean sheet of paper. Whenever her crayon ran low, Calvin was ready with a new crayon. That way, BB didn't have to waste any time. And in return, BB could draw 5 or 6 airplanes for Calvin. It was 12:30, time for art. BB was ready. On her desk was a sheet of yellow construction paper. In her hand was a green crayon. Calvin was ready. He had a stack of paper and a box of crayons. "Ready, BB?" asked Calvin. "Ready, Calvin," said BB. "Okay," said Mrs. Jules, "time for art." She could hardly finish the sentence when BB had already drawn a picture of a leaf. Calvin took it from her and placed another sheet down. "Red," said BB. Calvin handed BB a red crayon. "Blue," said BB. He gave her a blue crayon. They were quite a pair. Their teamwork was remarkable. BB drew pictures as fast as Calvin could pick up the old paper and set a new one down. A fish, an apple, 3 cherries, bing, bing, bing. At 1:30, Mrs. Jules announced, "Okay, class, art is over." BB dropped her crayon and fell over at her desk. Calvin sighed and leaned back in his chair. He could hardly move. They had broken their old record. BB had drawn 378 pictures. They lay in a pile on Calvin's desk. Mrs. Jules walked by. "Calvin, did you draw all these pictures?" Calvin laughed. "Oh, no, I can't draw. BB drew them all." "Well, then what did you draw?" asked Mrs. Jules. "I didn't draw anything," said Calvin. "Why not? Don't you like art?" asked Mrs. Jules. "I love art," said Calvin. "That's why I didn't draw anything." Mrs. Jules did not understand. "It would have taken me the whole period just to draw 1 picture," said Calvin. "And BB would only have been able to draw 100 pictures. But with the 2 of us working together, she was able to draw 378 pictures. That's a lot more art." BB and Calvin shook hands. "No," said Mrs. Jules, "that isn't how you measure art. It isn't how many pictures you draw, but how good the pictures are. Why, a person could spend his whole life just drawing 1 picture of a cat. In that time, I'm sure BB could have drawn 1,000,000 cats." 2,000,000, said BB. Mrs. Jules continued, "But if that 1 picture is better than each of BB's 2,000,000, then that person has produced much more art than BB." BB looked as if she was going to cry. She picked up all the pictures from Calvin's desk and threw them in the garbage. She ran from the room. "I thought her pictures were good," said Calvin. He reached into the garbage pail and took out a crumpled up picture of an airplane. BB walked out to the playground. Louis, the art teacher, spotted her. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I'm going home to draw a picture of a cat," said BB. "Will you bring it to school and show it to me tomorrow?" asked Louis. "Tomorrow?" laughed BB. "By tomorrow, I doubt I'll even finish 1 whisker." Chapter 7, Calvin. Calvin had a big round face. "Calvin," said Mrs. Jules, "I want you to take a note to Miss Zarves for me." "Miss Zarves?" asked Calvin. "Yes, Miss Zarves," said Mrs. Jules. "You know where she is, don't you?" "Yeah," said Calvin. "She's on the 19th story." "That's right, Calvin," said Mrs. Jules. "Take it to her." Calvin didn't move. "Well, what are you waiting for?" asked Mrs. Jules. "She's on the 19th story," said Calvin. "Yes, we have already established that fact," said Mrs. Jules. "The 19th story," Calvin repeated. "Calvin, I know the 19th story," said Mrs. Jules. "Now take it to her before I lose my patience." "But Mrs. Jules," said Calvin. "Now, Calvin," said Mrs. Jules, "unless you would rather go home on the kindergarten bus." "Yes, ma'am," said Calvin. He slowly walked out the door. "Ha ha ha," laughed Terrence. "Take it to the 19th story. Give it to Miss Zarves," hooted Myron. "Have fun on the 19th story," called Jason. Calvin stood outside the door of the classroom. He didn't know where to go. As you know, when the builder built Wayside School, he accidentally built it sideways. But he also forgot to build the 19th story. He built the 18th and then the 20th, no 19th. He said he was very sorry. There was also no Miss Zarves. Miss Zarves taught the class on the 19th story, and since there was no 19th story, there was no Miss Zarves. And besides that, as if Calvin didn't have enough problems, there was no note. Mrs. Jules had never given Calvin the note. "Boy, this is just great," said Calvin. "Just great. I'm supposed to take a note that I don't have to a teacher who doesn't exist, who teaches on a story that was never built." He didn't know what to do. He walked down to the 18th story, then back up to the 20th, then back down to the 18th, then back up again to the 20th. There was no 19th story. There never was a 19th story, and there never will be a 19th story. Calvin walked down to the administration office. He decided to put the note in Miss Zarves' mailbox, but there wasn't one of those either. That didn't bother Calvin too much, however, since he didn't have a note. He looked out the window and saw Louis, the yard teacher, shooting baskets. Louis will know what to do, he thought. Calvin went outside. "Hey, Louis," Calvin called. "Hey, Calvin," said Louis. He tossed the basketball. Calvin dribbled up and took a shot. He missed. Louis tipped it in. "Do you want to play a game?" asked Louis. I don't have time, said Calvin. I have to deliver a note to Miss Zarves on the 19th story. Then what are you doing all the way down here, said Louis. There's no 19th story, said Calvin. Then where's Miss Zarves, asked Louis. There's no Miss Zarves, said Calvin. Well, then what are you going to do with the note, asked Louis. There is no note, said Calvin. I understand, said Louis. Well, that's good, said Calvin, because I sure don't. It's very simple, said Louis. You're not supposed to take no notes to no teachers. You already haven't done it. Calvin still didn't understand. I'll just have to tell Mrs. Jules I couldn't deliver the note, he said. That's good, said Louis. The truth is always the best. Besides, I don't think I understand what I said either. Calvin walked back up the 30 flights of stairs to Mrs. Jules' class. Thank you very much, Calvin, said Mrs. Jules. Calvin said, Mrs. Jules interrupted him. That was a very important note. I'm so glad I'm able to count on you. Yeah, but you see, said Calvin, you delivered the note to Miss Zarves on the 19th story? Asked Jason. How did you do it? What do you mean, how did he do it? Asked Mrs. Jules. He gave Miss Zarves the note. Some people, Jason, are responsible. But you see, Miss Jules, said Calvin, the note was very important, said Miss Jules. I told Miss Zarves not to meet me for lunch today. Don't worry, said Calvin. She won't. Oh, good, said Mrs. Jules. I have a coffee can full of Tootsie Roll Pops on my desk. You may help yourself to one for being such a good messenger. Thanks, said Calvin, but really, it was nothing. Oh, that made me feel better. I hope it made you feel better. I'm feeling like a Calvin today, but I will vanquish today just as you will. But yeah, if you're getting overwhelmed, it's okay to pause and walk away. Because I have done that, and I have taken a break, taken a breather. But you know what? I am determined, and I'm going to get back there, and I'm going to figure it out. But I hope you have a wonderful day. Look at my hood. I feel like Darth Vader. I hope you have a wonderful day. Know that I miss you. I love you. I am praying for you. And honestly, it wouldn't hurt if you prayed a little bit for me and all your teachers, because this time is just as tricky for them too. But I love you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. See ya.